Alright, today we're going to try and do a quick video here that shows the replacement of our ignition switch on this 97 Ford F-150. Now this should cover pretty much all models of the F-150 and even things like the Explorer and Navigator from 96 to 2002. I've got another video that shows the starting system components and a little bit on troubleshooting, how you would figure out if your ignition switch needs to be replaced to begin with. But in this video, we're just going to focus on the replacement of the switch. If you're looking at troubleshooting diagnostics, take a look at my channel and scroll through real quick. You'll find a video on diagnosing, troubleshooting the starting system. So the first step in replacing this ignition switch is because this vehicle has an airbag system, it's recommended that you disconnect the negative and then the positive battery cables and then let the vehicle sit for 2 minutes so you don't accidentally activate the airbags while you're down there messing around underneath the dash and the steering column. So we're going to do that real quick. Alright, I've got those terminals loosened up, so we're going to disconnect the negative first and then the positive terminal, and then we're going to wait 2 minutes before we go messing around with anything else. Alright, so next step, once we've disconnected the battery and waited a couple of minutes, we're going to take and use our ignition lock cylinder. We're going to turn that to the run position, and that's important that we do that. Now, if you think your problem is in the ignition lock cylinder itself, that can be removed, and I've got another video that shows you how to do that. So take a look at my channel if you're wanting to remove the ignition lock cylinder. Again, we're going to focus strictly on the ignition switch today. And so our next step would be to remove this center trim panel that sits right below the steering wheel, just this big plastic panel here. I kind of already done that. I don't think anybody really needs a tutorial video on removing a plastic panel. Alright, the next step you're going to find, now you can get at it by just prying at this a little bit, but the two fasteners that hold that ignition switch in, one of them is kind of blocked by the front end of this little cover on the steering column that comes out. So there's 3 screws here that we can go ahead and pull on the bottom of this. They're just Phillips head, and get that bottom thing out of the way. Now we don't need to remove the entire top part of the cover, just we need to loosen this bottom part so we can get at one of those screws on the ignition switch. So we're just going to go ahead and start pulling these 3 Phillips head screws from this bottom steering column cover. Alright, so we've got that out of the way. Alright, so now with those covers removed, we've got some pretty good access at our ignition switch. So we've got to remove this bolt and the other one that's down here. And these are a Torx 30 that you're going to need in order to loosen those. The other thing we're going to have to do is disconnect the electrical connectors from this. Now I find it's easier to go ahead and get the part loose first to where we can actually get at those connectors a little bit easier. So we'll go ahead and loosen both of these Torx bit screws that are holding this ignition switch in there. Alright, so now we've got the ignition switch loose, and it's going to be a little bit easier to get at these electrical connections and get those loose now. So mine's got this little gray protector thing on it that it just snapped right off, and then we're going to go ahead and disconnect these. Alright, once we get to this point, you'll find, on mine anyway, there's a little bolt that holds these connectors in. Annoyingly enough, this is a, let's see, a 9/32 socket is what I had to get to fit on there to remove that little screw. So we're going to go ahead and take that out so we can get these electrical connectors loose. And once you get that loosened enough, then the connector comes loose from the actual ignition switch, which is what we're going to replace today. Alright, we've got the old one out, and we're going to get the new one out of the box here. If you're interested, you can see where I got that. I paid $13.94 for this new ignition switch that we're going to put in. We're pretty much just now going to follow the reverse procedure for putting that in. I think most people probably don't need to watch the rest of this video from here. You're just going to turn around and do the reverse of what we just did to remove it. But we'll go ahead and put this new one in. Now the first thing we got to do is make sure that the new ignition switch is in the run position. As you can see, our old one was in the run position. The new one, ideally it would come that way, but I'm going to need to move this to the run position in order to reinstall it the way the old one came out. And so really all we have to do is just take and click that to the run position. Alright, side by side, up here we've got the brand new ignition switch, and here's our old one. The first thing we wanted to do is we took this off with our key up in the run position, and we've got this little post right here. Ideally this should come with it in the run position, but this one didn't, so the first thing I need to do is go ahead and put that little lever into the run position so that it matches up with our old one. Now the reason we need to do that is because when we look up here at the bottom of the steering column, there's this little slot here, and there's a hole. If I can find that picture, there's this little slot here on the bottom of the steering column that ignition switch mates up to, and there's a little hole in there that little post on the ignition switch has to line up with when we go to install this thing. So that's why that's important. So we want our new switch in the same position as our old one. Now mine also, for some reason I don't understand, it has this piece in here, the new one, with these plastic tabs on it, which, as you can see, my electrical connector over here does not have a space for the tabs. It only has a space for the little electrical connectors to go into. So the old switch, it doesn't have that. I don't know why it's there. I don't know if some vehicles have that. But if you try and push this in there, these little tabs are going to block the connectors from actually connecting up. So Again, don't know why it's there, but on this new switch I bought, we've got to remove this piece here. So now we look at them and we want to look and compare those connectors and make sure that it looks the same. We've got the same blades in the new piece as we do in the old piece. And go. All right, so we've made sure that everything's the same on our old and our new. So we're going to take our new ignition switch now, and we're going to go right on over here and mate this up to our electrical connector. You know, it's got this little angle on one corner, so you kind of can't screw that up as far as how to line it up. And then we're just going to push this together, and then what we've got to do is come back to this same little bolt we had to loosen to get that connector off, and we're gonna, once we've got everything lined up, we're gonna start tightening that bolt, and that's just gonna go ahead and close the connection for us. All right, so we're just finishing tightening up this little bolt on the back of our connector with this 9/32, and as we've tightened it up, it's drawn the connector in and pretty much put it in where it needs to be. Alright, so we have finished tightening up this little 9/32. Our connector is plugged all the way in. We want to make sure that this little post is in the same position. And now what I want to do is look up at the bottom of the steering column here and try and show you this little slot that I was talking about earlier right here. And you see there's a little hole in there. So when we take this ignition switch and go to line it up to reinstall it, we're going to go put those two little hex bolts back in it. That's the first thing we're going to do. Now there's no way for me to get the camera in there and show you while I do it, but that's what we're going to be doing, is making sure that that little post lines up with that hole in that groove on the bottom of the steering column, and then we're going to go ahead and install those hex bolts. Alright, now by feel we're getting that little post lined up, and we've got it, and now we're going to try, and we may need to kind of wiggle this back and forth a little bit, but we want to make sure that that post is engaged in that slot, and then we can press this ignition switch all the way up to the mating surface, and then hopefully we can get those bolts in. Now like I say, we may need to wiggle and slide this back and forth a little bit. Okay, once we've got both those bolts tightened up, everything's back together, the next step is just to turn our key here and make sure nothing's binding, and it seems to be moving along there. That little rod in that slot seemed to be working properly, and then the next step in the process is just going to be to reconnect the battery, put these panels back on, put these covers back on, reconnect the battery, and give it a shot and test it out. Thanks for watching. That's pretty much all there is to replacing the ignition switch.